Good afternoon, everyone. What an exciting time. I think we should all give Ann O'D a big round of applause for putting this all on and getting us all together. It's just so exciting to be back here. I really, really appreciate it, and appreciate that you're all staying here this afternoon to hear myself and to hear some of the wonderful women who are going to be following me to talk about investing in your business. Now, imagine if it's 1977 and you're an investor. Now, you would know this if you were an investor in 1977, that most computers then were these big, huge things that filled up almost the size of this hall, could have filled up, and were only generally afforded by very large corporations, because who else could afford such a big computer, right? Now, imagine if, as an investor, you were approached by two young technologists, and they had this great idea. And they said that they could come up with a computer. They had designed a computer that would sit on your desk and with a keyboard would allow you to do calculations, do spreadsheets, we did have spreadsheets, and write reports. And they called it Apple? You're kidding? Apple computer? International Business Machines, that's computers. They were machines. What's this Apple business? But they said they needed $250,000 to get their business started so they could produce enough of these to have a certain momentum. As an investor, would you have invested in them? Now imagine it's 1978, and you're the parents of a young Wall Street analyst, and he's just read that the internet is growing at over 2,000% every year. So he gets this brilliant idea. He wants to sell books online. Who reads books anymore, right? But he wants to sell books online. And you're his parents, and he comes to you and says, but I could only do it if you invest most of your life savings. Oh, and by the way, Mom and Dad, I predict that you probably have a 70% chance of losing it all. Would you have invested in your son? Now, imagine if it's 1996, 97, and you're an investor, or 1998, and you're an investor, and two Stanford students approach you about their idea to create a program that will look for any and all data and information online, from scientific papers, to historical documents, to newspaper clippings, to chocolate cake recipes, to gene sequences. What's that? And they said they'd considered calling, and it would be a database that anybody could search and find from. And they'd considered calling the company Backrub, or maybe the Wattbox. This is true. But in the end, decided on Google, which was a word that was derived from the word Google, G-O-O-G-O-L, for the number 1 followed by 100 zeros. They were looking for $100,000 to start their company. Would you invest in these two Stanford students? Or imagine if it's 2004, and you're an investor, again, and the internet and e-commerce is all the rage now. So it's 10 years later, we figured it all out, it's all the rage. With the largest companies being, get this, Yahoo, remember them? Like eBay, and yes, Amazon. And his parents did invest. Your friend Sean Parker, the founder of Napster, comes to you to tell you that this kid who just dropped out of Harvard created this program online called FaceMash. He's thinking of changing it to the Facebook that connects college kids with their photos to other college kids, all about college kids. And he wants you to invest $500,000 for a 10% stake. Would you have invested in him? That's the question that Peter Thiel was asked, one of the co-founders of PayPal, by Sean Napster. Well, these are just a few of the funding stories behind our most iconic companies. And while we think of them today as the giants on the net, it's worth remembering that they had their starts too. And they too had to go and find the startup capital, seed capital for their businesses. And with these stories, though, and these are stories that we now know end more or less with happily ever after, right? But at least for the investors, if not for the founders, but certainly for the founders too. But with these stories comes the illusion of how easily these founders raised venture capital for their first companies long before anyone knew that they would become world-changing unicorns. But for every one of these stories, you have to know, and I'm sure you do know, and you've read about the fact that there are thousands of others, less successful, who never got there. Never got there because many were operating with the myths that come from these seemingly early wins. Now, after having been a serial investor myself, and more recently a serial entrepreneur myself in the Bay Area where I lived for 18 years, and that's after I had a successful corporate career. I did start when I was 12, in case you were wondering. Then I founded or co-founded 6 companies, raised millions of dollars. And I've worked with hundreds of entrepreneurs all over the world in some of my prior roles, entrepreneurs, or sometimes I call them wantrepreneurs. In my various roles as, first of all, senior advisor to Hillary Clinton at the US State Department, where I was the head of the Global Entrepreneurship Program. Also working as the president of the North American jury for Cartier Women's Initiative Awards, which I'll tell you a little bit more about later, as well as serving as an entrepreneur in residence at Georgetown University, among other things. So I get to talk to a lot of early stage entrepreneurs. And so often I find that these eager innovators are operating under lots of misconceptions that have hurt their chances, I think, of getting funded. And I was happy to hear in the earlier panel today the ASIA entrepreneurs and investors reinforcing some of these points. So hopefully if you were sitting in that audience, you'll hear a resonance here. So first of all, it's hard for me to see the whole audience, but how many of you have started companies? And how many of you have gone for outside funding? A few of you, many of you actually. And how many of you have been successful at finding the outside funding? So a smaller number so far. That doesn't mean you won't, but so far. So let's talk about the myths. The 5 myths, and I'm sure there are many more, but we'll focus on 5 because we got a limited time today, that are keeping you from getting funded. So myth number 1 is investors will recognize how cool my idea is, just like my mom did, right? Well, actually, no. Investors realize that your product is really cool when they see the customers lining up to buy it. Now, you may have a great idea, your cousin may love it, your best friend may have said it's the greatest thing since sliced bread, but until enough customers are willing to buy it, because as somebody in the ASIA session said, Dave, I think the gentleman who was the investor there, said, it's got to solve a pain point. It's got to resolve a problem. If it's not solving a problem to the point where people are willing to pay for it, it may be a great, cool idea, it's just not a business. If you don't have, as an example, just to let you know, Mark Zuckerberg's original Face Mash, long before it was the Facebook or Facebook, had attracted 450 visitors and 22,000 photo views in its first 4 hours online. That's called traction, and that's what you need as a starting point. A problem that you're solving that someone's willing to pay for. Let's go to myth 2. Now that more women are venture capitalists, and you've heard a little bit just now from Tracy, my chance as a woman of getting funded has greatly improved. Well, as TechCrunch has written, and I think Tracy may have, I didn't hear all of her remarks, but those I heard, I think she may have referenced this. Only 7% of partners in the top 100 VC firms are women. And if that's not bad enough, they only control 4.7% of the capital that gets invested in new companies or growing companies. Now, that said, there is some progress, if you want to think of it that way, and that is that the percentage of firms with at least one woman on the founding team, and this, by the way, is what TechCrunch uses that's how they define what a woman-founded company is. One woman on a founding team. So we're not talking about the woman founder, the CEO, or for that matter, even a C-level. We're talking about one woman founder. But in that case, if you use that definition, you were 70% more likely to get funded in 2015 than in 2011. So you were 17% likely to get funded, or 10% versus 10% in 2011. Now, the next myth is, oh shoot, if I don't get venture capital, how will I ever grow my business? I'm never going to get to grow my business. Well, actually, there's a full spectrum of funding options besides venture capital, so let's talk. You probably realize if you've started your own business that nobody wants to invest in you if you haven't used your own capital. Now, whether that's your savings, whether that's your credit card, and an extension of that you could say is friends and family, but some variation of your own capital that you've mobilized to start the company. The second, and actually should be the first, is customer-driven revenues, because again, the most important type of funding and the one investors value most is customer revenues, because it demonstrates that you're filling a real need. Another one is grants, and here's where I want to highlight Cartier Women's Initiative Awards. For those of you who may not be familiar, Cartier has been running a business plan competition for 11 years now, over a decade. And for the first 10 years, they were giving the finalists in each of 6 regions of the world, and each region has its own jury panel where we all come together at the end of the year for the final pitches. So each, and having reviewed the final business plans, each region was getting $20,000 a year, the woman winner in each region. But over a year ago, Cartier decided that now they would all get $100,000 each. So it's real seed capital. So again, Cartier awards $100,000 for each of 6 winners every year. And then this year in Singapore in April, when we were all gathering for the final pitches, the new CEO of Cartier was so impressed with the women innovators he was seeing and the solutions they were coming up with. He said, they're all worthy of support. And on the spot, he decided that each of the 2 runners-up in each region, that's another 12 women, would each get $30,000 each. That's more than the finalists used to get for 10 years. So there's the CEO who gets it, who's really stepping up and knows that, without the capital, these women are going to find it hard to grow their businesses or even start them in some cases. Now, applications are open till August 30th for those of you who are interested or qualify. 1 to 3-year-old businesses are what we look for. So please go online and find out more about it there. Cartier Women's Initiative Awards. Now, crowdfunding is another good option, which has shown some real promise, especially for women. You may or may not know this, but a recent study of rewards-based crowdfunding site Kickstarter by 2 Wharton professors found that women were 13% more likely than men to complete their Kickstarter goals. Now, this same study also found that in the technology sector of Kickstarter, an area where women, of course, are typically underrepresented, they fared even better. According to this research, roughly 2/3 of the tech firms started by women reached their fundraising goal on Kickstarter, compared with just 30% of the technology companies funded by men, or founded by men. Now, I have a key question here, and I couldn't find the data to answer this question, so I will continue searching and share it with Anne if I find it. And that is, were the women asking for less? Is that why they were so much more? Because that is, in fact, true. Well, it is what we see as investors when we face both men and women investors, that for comparable initiatives, women will tend to ask for less capital. So that's a question I have, and I hope to answer it soon. But on a different basis, another article interviewed the founder of equity crowdfunding site Circle Up. And he said that 70% of the women-led startups on Circle Up, his site, have raised money compared with 58% of the companies started by men. Now, in his case, he did say, these are not smaller ventures, the women's that is. The women are asking for the same amount of money as the men, and that is an average of $1 million. So one small data point, it doesn't make the market, but it helps us gain some more insights. But anyway, don't forget about crowdfunding, don't forget about grants, other opportunities. And then, of course, you have online or bank loans, you have angel investments, and finally venture capital. And now let me just rush through myth 4. The best way to get ready to talk to an investor is to complete my business plan thoroughly. Well, guess what? Unlike your third grade teacher, the length of your business plan does not matter at all to an investor. The investor really only wants 5 questions answered. That is, what problem are you solving? We talked about that. How big is it in dollars and customers? What makes your solution unique? What is your go-to market strategy? And how much profit and impact will you have? And of course, all of this is wrapped up in another major consideration, which is how credible are you, how credible and passionate are you and your team in delivering on this plan? And then finally, last but not least, myth 5. When I complete funding, I can finally return to running my business. Well, in case it's not clear, managing your finances must be an ongoing part, an essential part of running your business, whoever does your books. So, nothing will tank a business faster than a business that has run out of cash, because the CEO is so focused on operations or the product or marketing that they didn't realize they'd run out of cash even as the P&L showed a profit. So I hope that having debunked these 5 myths, you have a better idea of how you'll raise money for your business. And most of all, I wish you lots of success, because I know that you can do it. Thank you very much.